Welcome to another episode of Clinic Success Secrets, the podcast where we uncover the strategies and insights that drive clinic growth and elevate patient care. I'm your host, Tomas Dwyer, founder of Clinic Success Partners, a medical digital marketing agency dedicated to helping clinics serve more patients and achieve the success that they deserve. Today, I am joined and genuinely excited by the chance to have a great chat with a really fascinating guest, Romey Chopra. Romey is a seasoned pharmacist, visionary property developer, and what we're talking about mainly today, the founder of DNA Henley, a groundbreaking clinic concept that combines aesthetics, dental care, and a holistic and proactive personalized health approach right in the heart of Henley on Thames, which we'll be diving right into today. With over 30 years of pharmacy and a proven track record in transforming, buildings and by extension businesses into innovative health spaces, Romey is not just building clinics. He really is redefining, what a health hub should be in the UK. His work blends heritage, high-tech diagnostics, and a holistic care in a way that's incredibly rare and inspiring. So, Romey, I just want to say it's an honor to have you here, and I'm really looking forward to this.
Thank you, Thomas, and thank you very much for inviting me on to the podcast. And I'm really looking forward to us diving in there. And welcome for the opportunity, and looking forward to us having a good old chat today.
Perfect. So, with this being said, I know you've got as you mentioned, a very interesting trajectory and route that got to you to where you are. So let's bring us right back to the start. Where did your initial interest in healthcare come, and what led you to where you are today?
So my story probably started when I was about 11 or 12 years old, if I go back. And my story sort of unfortunately has a little bit of a tragic beginning to it, but I think with every person, there's always an element where you got to go through difficulties in your life that makes you the person that you are today. So my sort of first experience of being in a hospital environment, my mother was a nurse, my dad was an engineer, typical sort of growing up in a sort of suburban environment in London. And, my dad ended up being in hospital, very sort of situation. And then, unfortunately, developed a rare form of cancer, passed away very quickly. But that was my sort of first shock of being in the environment and healthcare, which sort of, I suppose it's sort of unexpected, but it's sort of, it gave me my first taste of what healthcare was about, albeit in a rather tragic situation. Followed by that, unfortunately, my mother fell ill a little while later, and she sadly passed away as well a couple of years later. So those 11 to 15, those first 4 or 5 years of my formative life was a pretty stark introduction into the healthcare, albeit, as I said, with some tragic consequences. But it sort of gave me the sort of thing about where I wanted to be, At that point, Thomas, I was so helpless. You're a 14, 15-year-old kid, nothing you can do. And I just felt, I had a purpose at that point to say, you know what, I want to never be in this position again where where I can't do anything. I'm helpless and I'm having just watched things happen around me. And you really feel very lost at that point. And that sort of gave me that foundation and grounding. There on in, it was just then I had a younger brother as well. So there was 2 of us. He was a couple of years younger than me. So, you grow up very, very quickly. You're a 15-year-old, and suddenly your whole world has completely changed. But it sort of defined me and realized that, now I'm his brother, I'm his mom, I'm his dad, I'm everything. And we had to sort of adjust to a very difficult situation. But we always said to ourselves, we always had these chats about, we want to make, we now have a purpose. We want to fulfill what our parents would have wanted us to do. So we quickly made the decision that healthcare was where we wanted to go. Wasn't quite sure what that was going to come out like because there was so much uncertainty at that point. I ended up going to university and doing pharmacy as a degree. Um, wasn't my first choice, I'm gonna admit. At the time, I really had visions of wanting to be a doctor because that was my first thing at the time. As you know, getting into medical school is horrifically difficult.
Not easy.
People, not easy.
Yeah.
And I suppose part of it was that with all the trauma and everything else and having to take care of everything at the time, probably wasn't quite, mentally prepared and ready. You've got to be absolutely on the ball and that's you. But fortunately, I got the grades enough to go to a great pharmacy school and managed to get a pharmacy degree. Which, hey, and I'm not going to demean the degree. I think it's a great profession. And it sort of allowed me to sort of enter into the healthcare arena in a very different way. My brother became a dentist, so we both sort of going slightly different paths. Um, and I think that's really sort of gave me, and then going into pharmacy, I think the key thing there was I realized, particularly after I'd qualified, that you were the first touch point for particularly in the UK. A lot of the time, getting access to see a doctor or a GP is quite challenging, probably even more so now than it was even then. And the pharmacist was always the guy that had the knowledge of everything, couldn't sort of, it's one of those guys that knew a little bit about everything. We knew about which medicines to take, what and stuff. And the great thing about it was one of those things you'd work in, and I used to work in Boots when I first qualified, and you'd be there and you'd probably see 40, 50 people walking in a day with all sorts of problems and issues, had no idea what on earth was going to come out of their mouth a lot of the time. But you had to be on your feet, you had to be thinking. And I think a lot of the time what I very quickly realized is that when somebody comes into you and they have this vision of you're somebody who's knowledgeable, has the education, and they have an expectation that you are going to give them some answers to a problem that's really affecting them, whether it's a cough or a cold or a blister or whatever the case may be. It may be in the whole case of things, it might be insignificant to you and me, but it's a big deal to them, right? And that's the key point, with whatever area of medicine we're talking about, whether it's in aesthetics or in medicine generally, that person has something is concerning them, they have an issue with that. And I think that's something I really picked on very quickly on that if you have the ability to be able to communicate with that person, connect with that person, and able to sort of relieve them of that concern and stress, that's a magical thing to be able to do because they walk away thinking, "Thank you very much. I feel so much better." You've given them right from whether it's giving them beach and powders or Calpol for this baby. It's crazy when I look back over the years about how sometimes the small things can make a big difference to a lot of people, right? And sometimes it's the attention to detail, and there's some of the things I picked up and I think we spoke earlier about. I was listening to some wonderful podcasts from your previous guests. And I think the key point again, and I think it's a great, great lesson for every practitioner or businessman to learn, is the art of listening. And that's what it taught me to do, to be able to sit there. And I think you've said this a lot of time. We're born with, 2 ears for a reason, one mouth and 2 ears, but we tend to use this too much and not do that a lot too much. And I think it's if anything, that's one thing I learned very, very quickly is that, the answers to a lot of the time is with the person that's in front of you. Listen to what they're telling you, and sooner or later you'll get to where you need to go. And that's one key lesson and one key thing I learned very, very quickly. And pharmacy taught me that. And I'm definitely very, encouraged to say to people that whatever line of medicine or whatever line of area they go into, when you have the privilege of having a client or a patient coming to you, the most respect you can give them is to just sit back and let them tell you their story, because that's their personal story, their personal thing, and that's important, I think, and that's probably the most valuable lesson I learned very, very quickly. Now that allowed me to apply that in all the things I've done going from there, and then helped me build up my knowledge and my ability to be able to deal with situations. And some of the time as well, you can't always have the solution there and then. That's always not possible. But the key thing is to sort of and always be honest and upfront and transparent. One of the things I've also realized in my journey is far too often people overpromise and underdeliver, right? And that's something which I feel, again, I have a philosophy in life. If someone expects a 6 out of 10, I'll always deliver an 8. Can't disappoint them then, right, on that situation.
Yeah.
So I do the reverse. I'll always under promise and I'll over deliver, because in our world, whether it's in aesthetics or medicine, with the best will in the world, the best medicines in the world, the best products in the world, there are going to be times where it doesn't quite do what it's expected to do. And, our bodies are unique. Every one of us is unique. And that's very much, the concept of DNA. That's the most unique part of you. It doesn't matter who you are. Your DNA is your blueprint. And that's the key. Once I understand what makes you who you are, what makes this tick, a lot of that time, what goes on here affects everything else that goes on everywhere else as well. So I'm always like to get into that and that connection with whoever I deal with. So that's pretty much my journey in terms of my foundation. And that sort of gave me my passion and mantra about what I am and what I love to do. And, I love, as I love to talk. So, communicate. So I'm a big believer in, if you've got that and you like doing it, and people at the end of the day, people love, I think it's interesting. We live in a world today where we don't, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, without the advent of social media and mobile phones, we used to talk. I just find now is in a generation, we don't talk anymore, right? And communication is so, so important. And it's become more and more impersonalized. And I think we're going full circle now a little bit. I think now a lot of businesses that actually go back to some of the stuff that we used to do back in the 80s, back in the 90s, where we actually used to talk and listen. We're not using all the devices. You know, I think that makes things a lot more enjoyable. I enjoy it a lot more when I'm speaking face to face and I'm actually engaging and really get to the real nuts and bolts of what's happening. Because far too often, you go to a GP, you've got 5 minutes to tell them what you want and prescription, and you run out, and you think to yourself, well, hang on a minute, I didn't even get to part two of what I wanted to talk about, right? And I'm already running out of the prescription. I just feel the whole system is just needs to, and that's really what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to overhaul or something which I believe needs to happen. And I think there seems to be more and more, particularly in the UK system. I think the UK is going through some real challenges at the moment. So in a nutshell, Thomas, that's pretty much my journey to now. Anyway, who we are today.
I love it. And if I was looking away, it's because I have a book just outside of the frame. I'm not going to get it because you need distraction, but called Lost Connections. And it's actually on that exact topic, saying, I fundamentally believe, you've heard me say this a million times over, everything in life boils down to the quality of your relationships, both with yourself and with others. And I think one of the biggest epidemics we have today, beyond the physical, you know, um, components, is that lost sense of connection, that lost sense of communication. That, from an evolutionary standpoint, you didn't communicate, you're getting eaten by a tiger or a lion or whatever. It's so ingrained in us.
100%. And I think we don't have to look back to that long ago when COVID happened, right? The one single episode that's happened where the whole world stopped just like that. And imagine how one single event completely has changed it to, and like I said, suddenly people found themselves in the most alien situation they've ever been in. And a lot of people found that very difficult. A lot of people still haven't recovered from that. And a lot of people are still having to try to adjust to that, whether it's on a personal level or a business level. Some have survived. Many, unfortunately, didn't. Many businesses unfortunately haven't. They've not adapted and changed because suddenly then you've got to just adapt to a different environment, a different way of working and stuff. So I think that was a real telling point. And I think a lot of people since COVID have realized that, maybe it's time to do things a little bit different now. And I believe that since then I've noticed starting to see a change. And when I start to talk to people about, where I believe that things should go and how healthcare should be delivered and how I believe the patient journey should be done, I think people are starting to say, you've got a point. Why is it we always, the English, we're very conservative. We just say, it's okay. We don't like to complain. We just get on with it. I mean, you know what I mean? But I think when it comes to your health, I think, I believe that we have a moral duty as a healthcare professional to try to deliver to the best of our ability, and where we can help and try to make that journey easier. I think we should all. I think collaboration is what I'm trying to do. And I'm trying to collaborate with as many, because you can't do this as a sole person. You've got to work with other people. And I'm trying to, and I think the healthcare professionals tends to be, they tend to be a lot of people out there doing stuff in the perimeters. And I think there is an opportunity now for a lot of people to come together, and by doing that, I think there could be a lot. The results could be a lot better. So that's where I'm trying to do and develop my journey going forward.
I love that, and I definitely want to talk a bit more about your journey because I know you've had some interesting segues and
Yes.
by and all that. So we would definitely talk about that because that's definitely you taking the road less traveled, as Robert Frost would say. But a quote from a previous podcast guest of ours, Tim Romanowski, comes to mind when you talk about having two ears and one mouth, and that was I think it was so well said. He said, "If you listen to your patients, they'll tell you what they think they want. If you listen a bit more, they'll tell you what they really want. And if you listen just a bit more, they'll tell you what they need." And as you said, it's that whole point about taking the time, listening, and redeveloping that relationship because we are a holistic entity, as you said. We're each individual. If you just address symptoms reactively,
Mm.
you know, you could be fanning the flames. You're not putting out the fire itself. So I love
I
your
think,
ethos.
and I think all of us, from time to time, will watch. You know, all of us have watched Grey's Anatomy. All of us have watched Casualty. All of us have watched ER programs of some sort or the other. And I think, and I always say to people, I said, when you get rushed into a hospital and you get to an A&E unit, they have no idea what on earth is just pulled up in the trolley, and they've got to go through a whole series of diagnostics and checks and history and this. So you can imagine, I always find, any doctor, it's almost like he's got to be like a Sherlock Holmes. He's having to find the clues and where things are and stuff like that. So you've really got to dig into the nuts and bolts and finding out. And I think the more you do that, statistically, the more likely you're going to find the real issue, the real problem. You know what I mean? Um, and I'm just saying, I know we're going to touch upon my journeys in when I was in Asia, but one story that always comes to mind, and I've told the story many, many times, and it's one of those ones that sticks to me, and it's been more than 12 years ago since it happened. But I had a wonderful opportunity of going to Mumbai, as I think I've talked to you, and we'll talk about it shortly. And I had this wonderful opportunity of meeting a gentleman. Now, it's interesting how every country in the world has specific cultural things which have an immense effect on people's lives. Now, in India, typically when a girl gets to about 18 years of age, that's the point where generally the father will look at getting them married, because that's traditionally and culturally the way things are done. Whether you approve of it or not is secondary, but that's typically how things work. Now, he had two daughters. He'd married the older one, and the second one and typically in that part of the world, they use various platforms because obviously we're talking at that time, social media was quite active at that point. And the problem that she had a condition where she had acne as a young teenager and a lot of scarring, and she literally was covering herself up. She had no confidence. She had tried to commit suicide on two or three occasions. Really, a 17, 18-year-old young girl who was in a really difficult, desperate state. And I remember sitting in the office, and I heard him come into the clinic, and I could hear him talking to the manager at the front desk, and she said, "Look, we can do this, but it's going to cost this, it's going to cost that." And he said, "Look, I don't have the means to be able to do this and stuff." And at that point, you sort of have this, moment. And I came out of the room. And I said, "Listen, please come in and see me." So I sat down with him, and I looked at him, but more importantly, I looked at his daughter. I could see someone who was in who was in so much pain mentally, physically, emotionally, that really touched me. And I thought to myself, I've got to do something. I really have to do something here. And I said to him, I said, "I'll tell you what I'm going to do." I said, "You know what? I want to offer you a gift. I'm going to look after your daughter. I want to take her out of this thing, and I'm not going to ask you for anything. I'm going to do this from, and that's." I said, "I want to see I want to see your daughter get married. So this is my wedding gift to you, well in advance, as it were, right?" And he was obviously very thankful of that. And I'm not joking, Thomas. Within 3 months, we saw a difference. It's just the fact that the right technology, the right thing, the right diagnostics, all of that. 8 months later, that girl was walking on a catwalk model for one of the top modeling agencies in Mumbai. right? 3 years later, 3 years later, she gets married. 2 years later, she has a child, and I get a letter from her father every year to say, "We can never thank you because, her life's changed completely." And that's for me, you can't buy that. There's no amount of money that can, and that's for me is what it's all about. That you have, you've made, sometimes I always say that, we talk about touch points. I always believe if you can make a positive difference in people's lives, you know, eh, that is such an immense thing to do, which is why I think doctors in this world, they do this every day. They come in and and I think it's a wonderful thing. But, when people say to me, I said, what I want to do is I want to be able to, be able to deliver a situation where I can make a meaningful, impactful, thing to people. So they go away thinking, you know what? I was fit. Even if I can raise them 10% off the ground, Thomas, I've already won in that situation, right? It's funny in our industry. See, people. I always talk about people realizing people's expectations. Hey, can you make me look like Brad Pitt? Can you make me look like some other Romey Chopra? Yeah, and you know what? A lot of the time, and my answer, and like I said, it's all about for people's expectations being managed effectively. I said, listen, I can't promise you to make you look like Brad Pitt, but I'll certainly get you a lot closer than where you are today, right? And that's all you need to do, because that's why I'm a big believer in you know, understanding where the fact that somebody comes to you, they always, first thing I say to you, look in that mirror and tell me, what is it that you don't like? What is that mirror telling you that's making you feel the way you do? Because clearly you're not happy. Okay. And, and that's really where a lot of the time, particularly the aesthetics industry, I take a very different view about, and I take the time and trouble of really understanding. A lot of the time I try to say to people, is this what you really want? Are you sure this is what you want to do? Go away and think about it. Have a chat with your spouse. Have a chat with whoever means anything to you. Don't do it because they want you to do it. The person that you've got to, your person that you are doing this for is the person that you're looking in the mirror at. That's the person that is most important. Everybody else is secondary, but that's the most important. And I think that's when you do that and you've got that connection, that person thinks, wow, and then thereafter, what I try to then understand is a lot of the time, Thomas, what I've also realized, and this is what DNA is about as well, is a lot of time when people come to you with a issue, a lot of the time what goes in the inside projects on what happens outside, sort of thing. So once I've decided to have a slightly different approach to how I do things, because I feel that a lot of the time, you come in, and if somebody is coming in, you go in, then you can give them the best treatment or the best product. But if you've not gone down to the root cause of the problem, 3 months later, 4 months later, they come back and say, hey, Thomas, look, it went great and that's come back again. Clearly you've not done it right. Your product's not good. Suddenly you're on the back foot situation. So I'm a big believer in really go to the understanding about what's going on before, because if you fix what's going on inside, the chances are 50% of the problem will probably go away, and then whatever you do is going to be enhanced anyway. So it's a slightly different approach to how I do things compared to maybe how it's been done traditionally. But that's a lot of my mantra. I like to really get to the nuts and bolts of what really is happening, and I think that's important. And we live in a world where everything is just, we tend to be rushing here, there, and there. Instant, yeah. We live in that sort of society that everybody wants that instant solution or instant response. And I try to educate people that sometimes there isn't. It's not like taking a paracetamol and hopefully the headache goes away. I wish it was that easy, but unfortunately it isn't, because we live in a world where we've got a lot more things that have an effect: what we eat, how we think, the stresses, the strains, you know, environmental pressures, what Mr. Putin's doing or Mr. Trump is doing, all this stuff is affecting us in some way, shape, or form. So we've got this constantly happening, and some of us can take it without having a problem. Other people, it affects people in different ways, and that can project itself in many, many ways. Yeah, it's an interesting, and I think it's an interesting approach. But a lot of the medical practitioners and a lot of people I speak to, they say, you know what, yeah, I think you've got a point, because it's true, because there's no question in my mind with the diverse amount of knowledge I've managed to obtain. I've been fortunate enough to speak to so many different practitioners from all over the world, and you learn from every time, because you've got access to people from, I've gone to Singapore, India, Australia, Japan, all over Europe, and I've had the privilege of being able to speak to many, many people and understand. And you go away and you pick things up, and that's why I try to say, okay, I've come back to London now in the UK. How can I take all that knowledge and then be able to come out there and give people a much more broader range, a broader horizon of what's out there. Um, and then hopefully that gives people the element of being able to make an informed choice about what path they want to take and what they believe, rather than say, right, okay. Because a lot of the times, honest, you and I have grown up in a situation where you run to doctors, he writes something on a piece of paper, you can't even read it. You run to the chemist, you take a tablet 3 times a day for 7 days, and you hope the problem's going to go away. But that's only
Take it at face value.
we've been conditionally, but we never question it, right? Sort of thing. So as a pharmacist, I grew up questioning every time I got a prescription from the doctor. So that's just me. My nature is always to question. I'm not saying it's not undermining. I always say, "Well, please don't take it personally. I just like to know a little bit more about why you're doing what you're doing," sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I believe that at the end of the day, we have a right to question. That doesn't necessarily mean, because it's your body, it's what you're taking. It's important to do that, I think. And so when somebody comes to me, I'll say to them, "This is what I believe is a path you go, but I haven't got all the answers. But what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to go and have a chat with Thomas. I'd like you to go and have a chat with this person or that person, because I believe they're going to give you some great advice. Then come back to me, and then we can have a discussion again." And then I think that's where that trust and that connection and relationship starts to come together, because they realize you're not just trying to sell them something just for the sake of selling them something. And I think it's a different approach. It's a more protracted approach, but I believe if you're able to do that, the clients and customers that you'll have will stay with you for a longer period of time. That's my belief anyway.
I agree 100%. I think on a nearly an interesting meta level, obviously, at the end of the day, we both run service-based businesses of different sorts. But, this conversation we've had where people, they may overpromise, underdeliver, we will get into that. But on the marketing side, it's just the first thing we've said is like, listen, let's set expectations. Let's take it from the ground and build up and really look at what's feasible. Like, think long term, not just, as you said, prescribe something, say, hey, 3 times a day, 7 days.
Mm.
You might get a quick flash in the pan improvement in symptoms, but fundamentally, if there's from a business standpoint, for it to work together, there may be an infrastructural or foundational bit of work that needs to be done. From a healthy parallel, you might be completely ignoring the root. And I think it's so important to just spend that 30% longer, 40% longer, 50% longer. As I said, not just give the person what they want or think they want, actually talk to them about what they need and be realistic. So I love that, but I need to hear a bit more about the Mumbai stuff. Like, apart from that amazing story with that girl,
Yeah.
what was that like? What was the story there? Like, what actually?
Okay, so I'll tell you how it all came about. I'll tell you how it all came about. So there was a company who were a large company they had over 150 clinics around Asia Pacific, and they were growing at a rapid rate, and they had a very unique concept. And so my brother-in-law, in fact, was a private banker, and he was their primary consultant. And they said, look, he said, look, I've been approached by a company. They're looking to expand into the Indian subcontinent, but they're used to having very structured environments, culturally very similar to what they've been working with. They've gone to India and they are completely out of their depth here. But it was important for them to have a position there, because they were looking to float their company in some years' time. So he said, look, I've got a proposition for you. Why don't we fly you over here? And I was a bit dubious at first, to say the least. But then they flew me out to Shanghai, put me up with the Four Seasons, put me on a first class ticket, and I thought, okay, well, this is starting pretty good. I'll take that for starters. Anyway, so I was there for almost a week, and then I flew to Beijing, and then they took me to Singapore, and then I was in Bangkok and stuff. We did a circuit for about 10 to 12 days. Really loved what their concept was. And then I said, look, guys, what you're doing is great, but you're working in an environment and a structure which is already quite developed. India's a whole different playground. And I said, look, I hadn't been to India myself for a long time, but culturally, the way things are done there are very, very different. They said, okay, look, we'd like you to head up an operation in India. Would you be interested? I said, look, you know what, this is a challenge I'm willing to take, So I took the plunge, and originally I flew to Delhi. Um, I don't know if you've been to India, Thomas, but so I'm sure, Delhi and Mumbai are two very different. Although they're in India, Mumbai is like the New York of India, and Delhi's a bit like Washington. So two very different types of dynamics in terms of areas. So I realized as well that I soon realized after spending a few weeks in Delhi that Delhi wasn't really the place to be. Mumbai was the place to be, the home of Bollywood, the home of all the stock exchange and Ireland, and a real party city. I thought, yeah, this is the place to be. This is where the aesthetics environment needs to happen. So I went out there. We're talking about 2014 when I went out there. 2014, end of 2014, I was there, and it was interesting because it was one of the first things I realized when I was there is that all the aesthetic practitioners that were there were working in places that I wouldn't take my dog, forget an individual, because it was just horrible, dirty. There was nothing aesthetic about the place. You're there delivering an aesthetic procedure. Crikey, you guys haven't even put the wallpaper up here. Wow, this is quite interesting. But it's interesting how people who are conditioned and accustomed to having that, they said, no, 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 we're not. It's interesting. The dynamic there was, well, because it's a very price sensitive market. And that's the thing that's the thing there. They said, we're not going to spend, okay, if he's spending all this money on glamorous wallpaper and marble floors, he's going to put up his prices. That means we're going to have to pay more money. But if he's working out of a garden shed, that means he's going to lower his prices because he's not having to spend so much money. Quite an interesting dynamic at the time. But I think there was a change because the newer generation who'd traveled abroad and seen places that did things differently,
Yeah.
whether it's Singapore or Dubai or places like that, they were now saying, well, it'd be nice to see if somebody could open up a nice place. And that sort of gave me that little spark moment. So I then launched my first aesthetic clinic in Mumbai back in, like I said, early 2015. And at that point, it was a real splash because it was probably the best looking clinic Mumbai had ever seen.
Mm.
It's almost like a Taj Mahal in aesthetics coming into Mumbai. It was a real thing.
Wow.
And suddenly I found myself in a bit of a whirlwind situation where, every journalist wanted to speak to me. I was on the radio. All the Bollywood actors would come out and say, "Hey, Romey, I'd like to come out for dinner with me." So for the next 18 months, I had probably the best time of my life. I was pretty much in the newspaper every other week, for the right reasons, of course.
Disclaimer.
But it was interesting because from a marketing perspective, it was phenomenal because I was getting all this free publicity just because I'd done things a bit differently. Interestingly enough, as well, being an Indian guy with a British accent certainly, made some waves as well. And it's just the fact that being being brought up in the UK, being educated in the UK, there's an element of regulation, transparency, which was pretty much non-existent in India at that point in time. So I brought a slightly different thing to it, but it was a real, I mean, the learning curve for me was exponential because everything there's so different from anything else I've been, so even though culturally I'm Indian descent, but I'm born and bred here, so I was pretty much like a fish out of water to some extent. But I used that to my advantage because I realized I was different, but at the same time, I wanted to put a message across to say, listen, aesthetics is and more importantly, I wanted to get people to the world of aesthetics again, giving them an informed decision, making them make and understand, educating them. But interestingly, a lot of the doctors that I was working with at the time, they had what I call the typical white coat syndrome because they're so used to working in a hospital environment that when they were talking to the person who's come in for a Botox or a filler, he's talking to them as if they'd got some sort of deformity or something, right? They talk to them clinically rather than aesthetically type thing. So I had to train them. I had to give them social skills about how to talk to people properly, right? Sort of thing, So it was that, and I think that was the key moment where that was a great thing because I was able. A lot of them, I managed to transform them from taking that in and be able to talk to the patient, not as a clinical patient, but as aesthetic patient, as that transition. So that was really interesting. But I think the mixing and Bollywood is a crazy world. It really is. I mean, It's a very frenetic world. But everyone, the aesthetics at that point was really on the rise, and people were really starting to get into it in a big way. And over the last sort of 6, 7 years in India, particularly, I mean, Bollywood industry has grown, probably one of the biggest in the world now. And you see the transition in terms of how people have adopted it, and yeah, how they look after themselves. Funny, if you look at Indian films 15 years ago, the guys were all pretty, pot belly, not particularly good looking and stuff. Now these guys, 6 pack, 8 packs, chiseled jaws. I mean,
Yeah.
look at the IPL. Look at Virat Kohli. Look at all these boys. They're all superstars. So it's
Yeah.
interesting how it's changed in such a short space of time, and how people look, how they perceive, and everything else is so important. And in India, you know, hair hair, skin, and teeth is like a religion there, literally.
Wow.
People look absolutely pucker. Even now, you have designer beards. You've got designers. It's crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Things have gone there, but I got in there right at the sort of infancy part of it, and I was but it was a great ride, and I really learned a huge amount dealing with India's it's got such a plethora of different people. Whether you travel 100 miles, you deal with people with different cultures, different foods, different languages. And the skin type as well. You can go from Fitzpatrick 6 to Fitzpatrick 2 in a 200-mile radius. It's just so the challenges, the difficulties, and how I was thrown. It really, I was, but I loved it. I absolutely loved it because it was a great time, and people really were like little sponges wanting to understand information. And it got me that I was traveling around, flying to Singapore to find out what would be the latest thing there. I'd go to Japan, or I'd go to Bangkok, because Korea at that time, Singapore, Korea, Bangkok, and these sorts of countries were their aesthetics the advancement of aesthetics were just going from strength to strength. So it gave me the opportunity of learning a huge amount about the industry in a global perspective rather than just in a local perspective. So it was a great training ground, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And as I said, and from a marketing perspective, I realized very, very quickly how connecting and realizing how to do, because I never really understood marketing until I really got to India, because they, but it was done by default a lot of the time, because obviously I was thrown in
Yeah.
it, and I was a bit of an enigma at the time, as I said. I mean, I was fortunate. I was invited to be a judge for, I think Miss India or Miss one of these competitions. I mean, quite, what topic? What 25-year-old wouldn't enjoy that, you know? It was incredible at the time, right? So, it was wonderful, wonderful experience and wonderful opportunity. And it really then endorsed and made me realize that this is something I really wanna, I'd love to do. When I said it, because I've actually, I remember it's funny because I was there for about almost 2.5, 3 years, and then my wife was here in London bringing up my 2 young kids at the time, and they said, "How's your husband doing?" "Oh, he's working really hard in Mumbai, and stuff." And she was really, because she goes, "Have you seen the latest Instagram? He's there with hobnobbing with all these girls from some competition." And my wife's like, "Really? Doesn't seem like he's working very hard." A week later, she's on a plane. I'm in a hotel, ready to go for my next gig, and I open the door, and she's standing there, and she goes, "Pack your bag, you're coming home." So but no, no, but it was great. But as I said, I knew at some point the fun, I had to come back home and take my role on looking after the kids and stuff at the time. So, but great gig, and more importantly, great opportunity to really learn, and gave me, as I said, the foundational confidence to do what I'm doing today. To be honest.
Love it. And let's on that note, let's dive into what you're doing today with DNA Henley. The share the vision. For anyone listening that wants to hear
I
what's
guess
DNA Henley.
Yeah, so DNA Henley. So I'll just roll back a little bit just to understand how that came about. So, you mentioned to me, so another thing that I do is I've always had a passion for property. Um, I like building things. I've been very fortunate to have done a lot of stuff in the property space where I buy ugly buildings and I make them into lovely swans, for want of a better word, or repurposing. As a lot of retail industry has gone through a really difficult time. So DNA we used to be an old Lloyd's Bank building, had been in Henley-on-Thames for, I think it'd been a bank building for over 150 years, I think, from memory. So it'd always been there, it'd always been established. And as you know, a lot of the retail banks had shut down. So when I came across this building, I absolutely fell in love with it. And I thought, what can I do? Is there any way I could make this into what I want to do? So took 2 years in the making. I made it into a combination of some luxury apartments and a lovely aesthetic, what was originally going to be a dental practice downstairs. So as I mentioned to you before, my younger brother's a dentist. Need I say, not just because of my brother, he's actually a great dentist, but he's specialized in what he does. And I've said to him, like, this is an opportunity for us maybe to expand and do something because he's predominantly NHS and partly private. But I thought, let's do something a bit more specialized, a bit different. So my initial thoughts, Thomas, was to create just a dental practice. That was my original plan. And I had a bit of a thought, and I thought to myself, you know what? First and foremost, he's running a practice at the moment. He's going to have to divide his time between the two, which means that those chairs aren't going to be occupied 6 days a week. So there's going to be a lot of spare capacity there. So I thought to myself, hang on, let's rein back a little bit and thought, how do I create an environment of consulting rooms which are predominantly designed for dental use, but could be used for other multi-practitioners as well. So it could be used for aesthetics, it could be used for acupuncture, it could be used for ENT, it could be used for hair transplant. So this is where my thought process was started to think about. And I thought, this is an interesting concept because I could have dentistry on Monday, aesthetics on Tuesday, ENT on Wednesday, and and the list goes on for each room. So it's almost a bit like what in the UK, Harley Street is the sort of a bit like Beverly Hills and Street. It's the mecca of medicine. Everyone goes there, blah blah blah. But if you look at typical Harley Street practice, it's a building which invites different practitioners to work in different rooms at different times. But because of the prestige, so I thought, how can I bring Harley Street to Henley? That was my original thought. Look at what Harley Street is doing. Look at the concept. I thought, I'll create an environment where I can have multiple practitioners working in a building, almost of the old adage of what we used to call a polyclinic to some extent, but with a little bit, but I want to put my own touch to it as well, because I didn't want to, you see, the thing is that, the word clinic typically puts in your mind that it's a place that people go there because they're not well, right? Typically, that's conditional thinking. So I'm a little bit averse to using the word clinic typically. So now I call it the Henley Health Hub, which is a hub where people get together, health and Henley. So Triple H, just great marketing, right? So that's the whole point of that as well. So, and it was really a place where people could come and we can get an assortment of different practitioners to come in there. So just to give an example, I know, for example, speaking to the general public, that trying to find a GP or getting an appointment with a GP it's almost like a lottery win nowadays. It's almost impossible, particularly in England anyway. So I thought to myself, and then when you can get a GP, Thomas, it'd be on a Wednesday afternoon at 2 p.m. and you think, well, that's scuppered my day, sort of thing. So
Yeah.
it's inconvenient and sort of thing. So I thought, how can I put it in a way where we can set up a service? So we thought, okay, let's do it on a Sunday between 12 and 4, a private GP service where people can book in advance to go and see them on a day typically where most people aren't working and probably going to be more convenient. Just to give you an example. Other things as well about how about most dental practices open from 9 to 6 p.m. right? Most of us have raging toothache on a Saturday evening at 8 p.m. right?
Yeah.
And the question then is, Thomas, if I asked you if you had raging toothache and you're in Ireland at 8:30 p.m., who do you call to get it to solve that problem? And you've got to start thinking a little bit.
I haven't a clue. Yeah. Yeah.
There you go, right? And I throw this to a lot of people that not sure about that one. And I thought to myself, how about we have a dental surgeon that works from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. 3 days a week? Right? I'm just throwing stuff out there to say, why does it have to be? If you got every clinic, I did a little exercise. I thought, let me look at 100 clinics and see what their opening hours are. And pretty much all of them are copy paste. Monday to Saturday, 9 to 6, 9 to 7, Sunday closed. Pretty much. Right? And I thought to myself, well, what happens if I work outside those hours or do something a bit different? You know what I mean? Um,
Mm.
and also trying to embrace technology, because I think healthcare has been a little bit slow on uptaking technology to some extent. So, I've gone to other countries where I could be your dentist, Thomas, and you say, I've got a bit of a problem, and I could do a video consultation with you, right? A lot of the time when you go and see a dentist, he tells you to open up your mouth. Well, I could do that looking at you on the screen potentially, right? Right?
Yeah.
Right? Or you can say, I've got a problem. And that, I mean,
Yeah.
I've done this. We've actually experimented with that. And a lot of the time I say, I can see you've got a bit of an issue there, whatever. Obviously, it's subject to some, but if you've got an infection, he can't even give you he can't even do an x-ray because the x-ray won't take while you've got an infection there. So for that, or the anesthetic won't take for that matter. So for that reason, they have got to give you a course of antibiotics for maybe 3 to 5 days until the infection goes down. But the problem is, until you see the dentist, until you get to that point, you'll want to get a pair of pliers and pull your teeth out at that point. So how about a situation where you got raise your toothache at 8:30 in the evening, and I can get you a video consultation within 20 minutes. And in that video consultation, the dentist will say, right, Thomas, I want to give you a course of whatever it is that he suggests at the time. And we're going to get a bike courier who's going to get the prescription out to you within 20 minutes. You start taking your antibiotics today, and you come and see me in 4 days' time, and we'll take things from there. Because when you do come and see me, I'll be able to do something rather than send you away, and then you're prolonging your situation type thing. So these are the sort of things I have picked up on in my journey as a healthcare practitioner, and the frustrations of saying, why does it have to be this way? This poor person is suffering. As a pharmacist, I can't prescribe it to them. All I can do is give them a paracetamol or an ibuprofen or clove oil or something else for a toothache,
Yeah.
just to use that as an example. Um, and I thought to myself, I really want to, I said, I'd love to at some point in my career to be able to provide the ability to provide a service that would be able to sort of circumvent some of those issues and challenges that people are having. And I think one of the other things I've also decided to do, I think anyone who is a practitioner looking to set up their own clinic, you know, um, many of them aren't taught about the 101 about how to open up a successful business. Let's be honest, right? Um,
Yeah.
and again, when I was listening to some of your earlier esteemed podcast guests that you had, you know, you come out of dental school, you come out of medical school, nobody tells you how to run a successful business. You just, they think if I knew what I knew today, I'd do things a bit different when I started type thing. So one of the things I've realized is that I'm going to stick to what I'm good at doing. I know how to structure business. I've had the ability to be able to know. So I'm going to be there looking at the business, and I will get the best practitioners to come in there to deliver the services, right? Not, so I have the ability to do that, but my my time and skill set is best placed in ensuring that I provide the best environment for all the practitioners that come in. I listen to them, I listen to the patients that come in, and make sure that all works wonderfully well. So hence I call myself the operations director of DNA, albeit I'm still there to jump in if required to do any, step in there, even meet and greet the patients. So I've taken a slightly different role in the business, or I own the business, but I'm going to be very hands-on, but in a slightly different way. And I'm not going to step on anyone's toes there. I'll make sure that every practitioner that I come in there, I will interview. I interview every single person who comes in to want to work with me about who they are, what their mantra, is their vision in line with mine, how they do the healthcare practice. And then suddenly then you've got a consistency of everybody's in there. Everyone's singing out the same hymn sheet. Everyone's there saying the same story. They have that same passion about delivering good quality healthcare in whatever capacity. And then I think one of the other things that came about for me was diagnostics. I think diagnostics in this country is so poorly done. I mean, I just give you an example. I decided and I thought, let me ring up my GP and say I'd like to get a blood test done. And I rang him up and he said, why do you want one done? I said, well, I just want to see what's going on inside. It's a bit like, it's like, when you take your car for an MOT, you want to just check diagnostically everything's okay. And blood's a great one to use. And it's unfortunate, unless there's something wrong with you, I can't get your blood test. And I thought, wow, that's really incredible that in this day and age. I said, look, I'm happy to pay for it because we can't even offer you that either. So it sort of gave me a moment to think about how I think there's an opportunity for establishments like ourselves to offer diagnostic services. So we again offer a holistic. So I've got ultrasound, I've got scanners and stuff like that in there. I'm going to bring in a radiographer, ultrasound specialist, so that you have access to the ability to go somewhere and say, okay, I'm happy to pay X amount because I know I'm going to get a result within 24 hours. Because a lot of the time, I think, Thomas, as well, the NHS is, really, at its, probably the worst I've ever seen. It's really, really struggling at the moment. And we're also having a situation that more and more healthcare workers either can't work in the UK anymore because of some of the immigration issues, or a lot of doctors said, I've had enough. I'm going to go to Australia and New Zealand with a better quality of life. I've got two young kids who are studying medicine at the moment. They've got another year before they qualify. And my son's already told me, he said, Dad, unless things improve here, I'm going to I'm off to Australia and New Zealand. And that's really sad, really sad. And I think we've got to, we're in danger of losing some incredible people who could make a big difference unless we change the system somewhat. But, as I said, I'm a tiny tadpole in an ocean here, but I want to feel that whatever service I'm doing here hits, I want this question about, I think we touched on this earlier. Far too often we wait for the problem and we've always grown up with a very reactive approach to healthcare. We wait for a problem, run to the GP and say, look, hey, I've not got a problem. We need to reverse that. We need to be more proactive and say, you know what, you need to start thinking about yourself a little bit more. Far too often, Thomas, I always think this adage, and probably should, I'll probably get told off for doing this, but guys with cars, you have a Ferrari, you'll see him polishing the wheels, you see him polishing the bodywork, but he looks like a sack of potatoes, right? Type thing.
Yeah,
And they,
that man, they Ferrari.
yeah. And then you've got to, I'll bring the ladies in there. They'll get a clutch bag about this big, and they probably spend about €3,500 on it. And you think, hang on, you can't even put a mobile phone in there. Oh no,
Yeah.
you don't understand. It's an ABC, whatever it is, right? Type thing. But it's incredible how we are as human beings and what we put what suddenly we put so much more importance to, right? Health is wealth. Health is wealth. There's no question about it in my mind. You get to, I have met some incredible people who've worked successfully in their lives. They get to the age of 60. I've had a fabulous career. I've had a fabulous life. Kids are great, married off. You know what? Now it's my time. And I said to them, listen, and they said, you know what? I haven't really looked after myself too well. And I don't want the next 20 years where I have the worst 20 years of my life because I'm in hospital, or I've got an ailment, or I've got Parkinson's, or I've got dementia, or I've got cancer, or whatever the case may be. So I always say to them that this is the time to invest in making sure you take a much more proactive approach to your health, because that you want the next 20 years to be good quality years of your life. So it's a program I'm encouraging for people who are getting into that age of their life where they've worked really hard, they've gone through the stresses and strains. And when you get to that age, that's when your body will start to have problems unless you start addressing those issues head on firmly at the beginning. So I advocate people get an MOT done, get this done, and I'll show you how to do it. I'll tell you what to do. I'll tell you the program, what type of, at 50, you should have a prostate scan. At 60, you should have this scan, at this, these are, so I try to give people or what I do for myself. I'm 60 next year. And I say to people that in the grace of God, I'm not joking, because it's not available in this country. I fly to India every 2 years, Thomas, and I have everything checked. I have 200 blood tests. I have every scan known to man done. And it's probably the best 5 days I spend in my life, because I go away there with a report that tells me you're all good. And then at least I know. And more importantly, I go to my insurance company and say, there you go. Can you reduce my premium now? Right?
Right. So this is financially wise as well.
Yes. So your insurance premium. So it's really interesting how I find that you got, every company in the United Kingdom will have.
That's incredible to me. Sorry, I'm trying to. That's no, just like how much? Do you mind me asking? How much does a test like that set you back in India? 'Cause that's
So if I share this with you, you'll be astonished. Let me put an example. If you want to have a MRI scan in the UK today,
Yeah.
you will be spending a minimum of £1,000 for one scan. This is just one single. Okay. If you want to have so typically, for example, a lot of it, as you get older, one of the biggest problems in the UK is people get blocked arteries, don't even know about it.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. And then they suddenly get a heart attack. And that's a big issue in this country, particularly because, the processed food we eat.
UK and Ireland, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
Yeah.
and the way to do it is, and the simple test is what they call a MRI CAT scan. A cardiac CAT scan, where they inject a dye, goes around, it opens, and then suddenly a big screen comes up with all this stuff. That probably cost you about £2,500 for that one scan. So I'm just giving you some numbers here. So
Yeah.
in India, this is in India, and I've got it all set up. I've got everything set. I can send you to India, Thomas. You can have all those scans. You can have 200 blood tests. You can have bone density scan. You can have they'll check your eyes, ears, liver, pancreas, kidneys, you name it. All in £500 for everything. And you'll get the results the following morning. I promise you.
I'm buying a flight to India.
It's incredible. I tell you what, there was a big thing about medical tourism, but people going
Yeah.
to Turkey and Thailand.
Vietnam.
Exactly. Yeah. But the problem with that is if there's a problem tomorrow with that, it's an invasive therapy, whether you go for teeth or hair or whatever the case may be. The problem is if there's a problem tomorrow, nobody in the UK is going to touch you. I'm not doing anything invasive here. I'm getting the test,
India.
and the tests there are better than the ones here. I showed my blood report. My wife went to see through Bupa. She went to see a private GP last week because she couldn't connect to her own one, so we ended up having to go privately. And I showed him her blood report, and he said, "This is the most comprehensive blood report I've ever seen." And he said, "That probably costs you about £350 to do that here." He goes, "Do you mind me asking how much you paid for it?" I said, 40 quid. He said, "What?" He says, "This is unreal." And I'm not joking. That's how crazy it is, And I just feel that I said to somebody, I said, "Thomas, tell you what I'm going to do for you. I want you every 2 years or every 5 years, fly to Mumbai, get all those tests done, and then and then I'll send you to Goa, spend 3 days. Once the Mumbai give you the green light, send you to Goa, 3 days on the beach, and then you can come home, and they'll still cost you a fraction of what you cost here to do the stuff."
Cheaper than a holiday. Cheaper than a holiday. Cheaper than one or two trips to the doctor back home. And you also are effectively making money because you just saved a fortune on your trips.
And you come back with a suntan as well.
There you go. That's all we need. That's all we
There
need.
you go. And and it's just interesting how how I was quite surprised that I thought people say, "Really, that actually can happen?" I said, "Listen, I've been doing it for the last 10 years. I've been doing this for the last 10 years. I've gone religiously go there. I go to, and it's ideally one of the best services I've ever done in my life. And I've advocated a lot of my friends and colleagues to do the same thing. My own GP went to do it last year, and he was simple. He said, "You know what? I don't understand why I'd not been doing this." Because at the end of the day, you want to know that there's something. I'd rather always say, find it early, deal with it, and get on with your life. Don't wait for the problem to happen. Make sure it doesn't happen in the first place. That's always my mantra. It was really sad when I was in Henley when I opened up. I met this wonderful gentleman, probably early 50s, 53, 54. And basically, here's the interesting thing. He had a stroke. Now, if for most people, when people do blood pressure, when they check about clogged arteries, they worry about everything in the chest. They don't realize the carotid artery that feeds the blood to the brain, because that can get clogged up. That can get clogged up as well. And this one, arguably, causes more damage than the other one does. With that other one, you can compensate. This one, unless you do quickly, you get a stroke. You get paralyzed very, very quickly. And the sad part is, it's a carotid Doppler machine. It's an ultrasound machine, Thomas. You put it to here, and it will measure the flow going through there. And all you've got to make sure is that flow is working within a certain percentage. If it's moved by 1 percentage point, that person has to be dealt with there and then. That machine is probably £2,000 or £3,000 to buy, but it's a lifesaver. And I'm just conscious of the fact that I'm just being conscious of the fact you might have to bear with me, Thomas, because I'm going to run out. But
Okay, no worries.
I don't want to cut that before. But my point I'm trying to make is that it's important that these are sort of these are sort of treatments and stuff that people should be available here in the UK, because it could save people's lives, but more importantly, it could save them from a lifetime of being paralyzed or having a stroke where they've lost, facial paralysis stuff. And this is what annoys me, because all of this is avoidable. All of this is avoidable. And I want to try to bring in these people and say, listen, your choice. I've got this machine here. It's going to cost you 100 quid. It'll take 10 minutes of your time. Is your health worth 100 quid? Your choice, right? And I just said, listen, crikey, that's 20 Costas.
Yeah. Or a few pints.
Yeah. I mean, it's probably, well, I don't know how much it costs for a pint where you are, but around here, it's almost ridiculous.
Yeah.
So I think that was that's a real eye opener, and it's a great conversation tool I have with a lot of people. And I said to the proofs in the pudding, I show them. I said to listen, I won't advocate anything that I wouldn't do myself or haven't tried myself. Okay. And I believe that, I'm entering into a stage in my life now where I'm between the next 10 years is where I'm going to have, if I'm going to have an issue, it's going to be now in the next 10 years. A lot of the time with men, it's either in your 50s or your 60s where things start to go wrong, generally, statistically anyway.
Yeah.
So, everything's older, your heart's older, your thing's older, your prostate becomes an issue. I mean, look at Chris Foy, famous Olympic cyclist, right? Tragic story. Crazy. Can you imagine, Thomas, in this country that you can't have a prostate test on the NHS until you're 50? So if you're 47 and you've got early prostate cancer, you're basically stuffed. And what's happened to Chris, is that he's got incurable prostate cancer. The poor guy's got 2 years to live, and it's just, I just feel it's crazy, right? Sort of thing. So I want to make it. I appreciate that. If I could afford to, I'd love to be able to do it for free, but I can't. But more importantly, I want to have give people the ability to access diagnostic things, or alternatively, if they can afford to, I'll tell you where to go. I'll set it all up for you. I'll get you the right people to connect to, and if you need a few days in the sun as well, I can organize that for you as well, potentially. Right? So I'm trying to signpost people to say, look, I'll do what I can do for you here in the UK, but I've been very blessed to be able to have the connections in that part of the world where you land in Mumbai airport, you'll be met, greeted, and taken care of in a hotel, blah, 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 all done for you. Come back, more importantly, knowing I'm all good. And I think for me, I think to myself, why wouldn't you do it? It begs the question, right? Particularly if you have the afford, if you're going to, and I think, because as I said before, if there's one thing that we take for granted, it's our health, and we only start to get worried about it. I think it started to hit home when people had COVID, or when people lost people with COVID, because they were okay one day and then they were gone the next day, type thing. You know what I mean? And that's how people realize just how fragile health is. That a single event, and we lost so many people in that period, as you know, and it was a horrible time for many, many people. I mean, I lost friends myself. I've lost relatives myself, so I know firsthand. And I've always said to myself that if you have the ability in some way, shape, or form of being able to provide a service that allows people to connect with that. So it's not just about aesthetics. It's not just about dentistry. Of course, I do all that and provide all that, but having an additional arm to what I'm doing as well. Hence the whole holistic approach. I want to say, what's DNA? DNA is a proactive approach, giving you the ability to make a proactive approach to your own health and wellness. That's the key. And I use health and wellness in a broad capacity, because, as I said, as I reiterated to you from the beginning, it's really important that you know what's going on inside. And sometimes what goes in, our bodies are remarkable machines, have the ability to compensate all the time. But there comes a point where it'll hit you very hard. And when it hits you hard is when you're going to suffer the most. And the key thing is, that's all about diagnostics. I would say, crikey, why does a Ferrari need to be serviced every 8,000 miles? 8,000 miles, because otherwise it isn't going to work optimally, isn't going to work efficiently. Formula One car, look how much they tweak a car. Doesn't matter whether you've got Lewis Hamilton in there or one of the other drivers in there. If that machine ain't working properly, it doesn't matter how damn good the driver is, that machine ain't going to perform. similar to ourselves. We need to start to take more. We can't rely on our GP to find an answer or your pharmacist to find an answer or whatever. You've got to start taking an initiative to say, you know what, I want to start to find out ways and means I can do things for myself. And I feel that, more that you learn about what's going on inside your body can also then reflect on what goes on outside. And that's really where I'm trying to position myself. And the whole point, that's where DNA is. DNA is getting to the root. Let's go to the real core about you as a person. Let's find out about what's going on mentally, physically, internally, externally, and you go away and say, right, okay, here, I've given you a blood report. I've given you a hormonal report. You want a DNA report? I can even give you a DNA report. So you now say, wow, now I really know what's going on in myself, right? I know, oh my God, I didn't realize I had an underactive thyroid. Crikey, I didn't realize my prostate PSA was a bit high. I didn't realize, for a woman, I didn't realize I had a polycystic ovary syndrome, which is why I'm getting acne. Didn't realize I had early onset alopecia, and the list goes on. And far too often, there's a lot of people working out. They're all time, waiting time bombs, waiting to go off, not even realizing there's a problem. So, I'm trying to address in it, and it's a big ask, but I love the challenge. I want to sort of people to think that here's a guy that's gone out there and done something a little bit different, has looked at it, and having worked in healthcare, having lost my own parents very young, and that feeling of not being able to do anything and that helplessness, I've taken all that negativity and try to make something positive out of it and try to see how I can come out and leave some sort of legacy in the world. Say, the guy helped a few people and made people think a little bit differently. Hey, you know what? If it wasn't for him, I wouldn't have had that scan done. I wouldn't have had this done. I wouldn't have known about it. If I could do that for one person, I'm won. I've already won. Yeah. And that's for me for me, the business, of course, is important, but it's what the business, at the end of the day, my job as a business to make lives. That's yeah, exactly. It's what it's going to do and what it's going to mean for certain people and what DNA. That's what people say. You know what, DNA made me do something. It connected me to that person. It sent me to Mumbai or did whatever it did. Whatever the case may be, I'm really passionate about it. And a lot of people who speak to me, they said, I can see it, we can see this means something to you. I said, yeah, it does. It does. It means a lot to me because, I really get angry and upset on a situation where someone's life gets compromised through no fault of their own, other than the fact that they weren't communicated or informed correctly. And had they been given the right information, there could have been a statistical chance that they could have been okay, or certainly less compromised than they were. And that's the bit that upsets me. And I think if there's any little thing that I can do to help people navigate through that journey, that process, to get a positive result and a more, a better solution. I mean, there are going to be cases where you can't, you can't help everybody, but I do believe that there are far too often too many, situations where people are just, they read something, they'll see a breakfast program, somebody will talk about something else, and they'll run and buy. It's like the whole weight loss thing, whether it's, Manjaro or Ozempic, all these things. Too much misinformation out there about that, and people are being able to buy it from all sorts of crazy places. I think that has to stop, and that has to be regulated. Even Botox and fillers, Thomas O'Crike. I mean, up until about a year ago, you could get Botox from butcher shop, for goodness sake. It's just. I think that all has to change. But I always say to myself, focus on what you can control. Forget about what you can't control. I can't control the government. I can't control the political agenda. I can't control what Trump and Putin or everybody else is doing, for that matter. Focus on what I can do and what I can deliver and what I can make a difference of. And that's what I'm doing. And bringing in people that's like-minded, say, listen, guys, this is who I am. This is what I'm about. This is my journey. And you in, let's work together. And let's try and see if we can make things a little bit better, a little bit more comfortable, and the discerning public. Because when somebody's ill and when somebody has a problem, the first thing is they're asking, hey, can somebody help me, please? Right? And I always say to somebody, the first sentence I say to them is, how can I help you? Those magic words. And as soon as you say that, automatically that person opens up to you. Just those few words, how can I help you? Right? And suddenly think, thank God somebody's listening. Somebody's willing to talk to me. Somebody's willing to take some, you know what I mean? It's the simple things, Thomas, that I think make the difference. And I'm trying to unravel all the complexities of running a business, running aesthetics firm, running things, all of which are important. Don't get me wrong. But I'm focusing on the fundamentals, because if those are not right, why am I doing it?
Yeah.
You know?
With that being said, I suppose we talked about the past, we talked about the present, the future. Like, what's the grand? I know, as you've said in the past, a lot of people take better health, better care of their pets than they do themselves. Or they buy the Ferrari, but they don't actually look at the driver, which is years
Yeah.
themselves. Um, say we fast forward and it's 2035, right? You've been DNA Henley has been growing, it's been thriving, you've got everything dialed in, your marketing, whatever it is. What's the vision? Like, how do you want things to look 10 years from now?
See, I think for me, if I can get if my story connects with people, and still people start to feel that this concept is a concept that could be scaled, because I'm trying to create something which could be replicated potentially in different cities in the country, wherever they are, sort of thing. Because I want the basic idea about bringing in practitioners and bringing in people in there and offering that service. And then, and it's an evolution, but, 10 years from today, if we had 50 DNAs across the country, in whatever, and I could look back and think, wow, it's a bit like I said to you earlier, when I get a piece of land and you build a house, you look back and think, wow, I did that. I built that. And that's always going to be there. Do you know what I mean? I'm a
Yeah.
big believer in, I want to have that legacy of thinking to myself. And, another thing I also just, I didn't touch on, I mean, I've been running a dementia care home for almost 18 years now up in the Lake District. And one of the most fulfilling things I do, because it's healthcare, it's property, it's combining two of the things that I'm passionate about. But more importantly, the key thing there is engaging with people who have gone through world wars stuff and through unfortunate situations, and they come to me. And I tell you what, I always say to people that when an 82-year-old man sits with you and says, God bless you, son, for taking care of me because I've been living out of a dustbin for the last 30 years. I mean, that's again priceless, because he's old enough to be my dad, or in some cases, my granddad, in some cases, right? So I'm a big believer about giving back, and I want to give back, but I want people to think, here's something, I want DNA to have a meaning or something, and understand, yeah, now the guy really got it. He got to the crux of what it's all about. He really got to understand that, wow, this is something that means something to me, because as I say, DNA is so personal. You can't get more personal than that. You can change everything else about yourself, Thomas, except that. That's the only thing you can't change. You can adulterate everything else, but not that, because that holds true forever. So that's where the origin of why I call it DNA, because for me that means something, because that's you and that's me, that creates our individuality, and that's what it's about. And I think I want that message to go across to people, that this is a concept, and it could have different iterations, and it could progress in different ways depending on, how we, it could be very specific, could be just diagnostics, it could be just aesthetics, it could be a combination. You know, this, you know, the care system is going to change considerably over the next 10 years anyway, I suspect. Who knows? But I can see things already. I can see I speak to my children through university and see how the new generation of doctors are coming through, how AI is going to change things and stuff. I want to learn that. I want to understand that AI is the next big thing. You know, how can an old fogey like me start to learn a bit about AI and start to, it's a bit like today. It's funny that every care home you have has to be Apple connected. 20 years ago, there was no such thing. It's amazing
Yeah.
how things have advanced, right? Because if I go to a care home tomorrow, I want to have sort of, an iPhone connection or this connection. It's just incredible how, so you've got to evolve and change how things are going. So I think we're in a sort of cusp of healthcare taking a really interesting direction. I think technology is going to have a big part to play in that, because we can't carry on the way we are. Population is increasing. Our elderly population, Thomas, is increasing faster than the younger population. We've got more people over 65 in the next 10 years than we have under 16. And we can't cope with the current demand, forget 10 years from now. So I think there's going to be different
Yeah.
things coming in, and hence the only way I think more and more practices should start to think, how can we I'm also, so the other thing as well with DNA is we're going to be a training academy. I'm going to train doctors, dentists, aesthetic practitioners about how to deliver, not just from a clinical perspective, but also from a social perspective, or how to deal with clients, how to work on a business and stuff. So it's a teaching program with a little bit of a few other businesses. So we're already accredited. We've already got Ofqual accreditation, PG Cert accreditation, all that's there. So I'm going to be so if you're a teaching academy and you're delivering the service, it gives you a different concept as well, and people take you more credible as well. So I'm trying to, and again, I'm bringing in the best teachers in an environment with the best equipment in a lovely part of the world to deliver that. So it's gonna, I think it'll evolve in multiple things, and it may well be that you have a DNA very specific service in some locations, or you'll have something which is a poly situation. So Henley is my pilot, as it were, for want of a better word, and it's a sort of test bed, as it were. And I'm trying different things out to see what works. And I believe over the next course of the next 2 to 3 years, I'm hoping that we'll find sort of the sweet spot, for want of a better word, and then hopefully that will give me the ability to hope and then work with other people. Because I said, listen, like I said, I'm 60 next year, and I've still got plenty of diesel in the tank. I still feel like a 40-year-old. So I I still got that passion and hunger to want to do
That's
it.
the best.
Exactly, exactly. And, working with people like yourself and other and great people in the industry, because the great thing is as well, it's lovely to have these sort of conversations, because it gets you the ability to be able to share your thoughts with the audience. And I'm not saying I'm right. I'm just sharing you my thoughts and my ideas and my 35 odd years in being in healthcare and what I've learned and what I believe that, this I just find it incredible. There are things that 35 years ago I was doing that's still happening today. I'm like, really? Wow, 35 years ago, and we've still got a paper prescription. Really? Hell, come on, guys. There's so much
Yeah.
we can do. There's so much. And when I go to other countries and I see things that are being advanced, I said, there's no reason why we can't do it here. We're just, I think with any industry, it's always introducing change. But I think it's now being forced upon a little bit, because there's such a mismatch of expectation of service and what's actually being delivered. And I think that's and you talked about on some of your other programs about the patient journey. The patient journey in England sucks at the moment. I'll be honest with you. It's just not great for a lot of people. And I'm trying to see how I can do some way in some social form of making that journey more comfortable, more palatable, and more importantly, getting the right result for that person, whatever the situation might be.
Love that. I really do. I think so much to unpack there. I think for anyone listening, re-listen to that last section on kind of what makes Romey Chopra tick, because I think that's beautiful. But with that being said, to wrap things up, Romey, if you had one bit of advice for someone starting a clinic for the first time, with all the lessons, all the scars, all the wisdom that you picked up, what would that one bit of advice be to Romey starting this clinic for the first time?
Stay true to yourself. Never be the person that you want to be, the person that you are, because I think that for me is what it's all about. Put your own personal touch to it, because that's your baby, that's your business, and make it how you want to be. You know, I always say to, I mean, when you have when you're blessed to be a father and you see your children grow up, you think, wow, you know what, I did something right. You know what I mean? Sort of thing. And that's what it's about. All that passion and energy and stuff you put in there, you've got to believe in yourself. You've got to say, and I know you're going to be challenged and you're going to be tested, but that's my advice to everybody be, if if I believe if you're passionate about it and you believe in it, positivity will come with that. No question in my mind.
So I think with that being said, Romey, I think that's a great way to finish this up. And I've just say I've really, really loved this. I think for anyone listening, and as you've said yourself, this is a consistent theme that I tend to find with the podcast guests or clients that I get along with the most. The people that are really viewing the big picture. What can we do to actually help people's well-being, not just their lifespan, their health span, as opposed to just their lifespan. So I just want to say, I'm excited to see what's ahead for DNA Henley. Um, and yeah, where can people find out more about you and what you do?
So DNA we have our own website now, so it's www.dnahenley.com. And Romey, obviously, I will. For those who you can find me on most of you Google me. I'm all over the place in Google. That's the beauty about having worked in Mumbai. I'm really fortunate. You put Romey Chopra up, I'm there, the top 10 on everything. But the funny thing is, all you see me is standing around pretty girls, which is not a bad thing, I suppose to think. But yeah, so you find all about me. I'm there. I've got, and yeah, as I said, anytime, if and anyone out there ever wants to contact me and wishes to give me any advice, more than happy to help them in any way I can. Not a problem at all.
That's great. Listen, Romy, I'll include any links in the show notes. I'll be on
Yep.
Spotify, I'll be on YouTube, and that being said, hopefully we'll be doing this again.
Yep. Look forward to it. And thanks again, Thomas, for the opportunity. Really appreciate it. I really enjoyed it.